Welcome to our study of of Journey Without Goal. And as always, kindly engage with this from the point of view of thinking how our study and practice of the path is directed towards the very core issue, the actual real issue that affects every sentient being everywhere at all times, which is this delusional fixation on a self. And delusional not in the sense of where there's hardly even a value judgment taking place there. It's just ignorance. And you could say it's a very innocent condition. Sentient beings are not bad. It's not like when we're angry at somebody and we say, oh, you're delusional. But it's simply just hallucinating, thinking what's not there is there. And getting stuck in this condition is then what we call samsara. And this is what affects everybody, everywhere, at all times, in what we call samsara. But this doesn't mean that this is the basic nature of everybody. The basic nature of everyone is free from this. And so our perception of others should be permeated by a recognition also of their innate purity. And of course, what we're discussing here in terms of the Vajrayana is very much approaching this dimension of purity, both in terms of ourselves and in terms of others. But this is not a philosophical project. This is very much something that needs to be addressed through a transformation, or you could say an elimination of our own ignorance. And so we engage in the path really with an appreciation for the purity that is innate to all sentient creatures, and yet with an awareness that temporarily there is this condition of deep confusion that drives the suffering of all sentient beings, including ourselves. So with that motivation, which we call preparation with bodhicitta, then we'll look at the text here. I'm actually going to, before getting into the text, I just came across something yesterday which I thought was just very inspiring. Some of you might be familiar. I have a few friends who are familiar with the monastery in Kham called the Gebchak Gompa, and somebody called, I think, Gebchak Rinpoche. He's been to Australia and also to the US and many places and taught. But Gebchak is actually a nunnery, and there's some very great practitioners associated with this nunnery. And I just want to read a short interview I came across yesterday with one older nun. She passed away now. I think she passed away in 2008, and I think she was 84 at the time. I'm not exactly sure when the interview was conducted, but I just thought I'd read it to you as a really inspiring little piece before we begin. Okay, so her name was Shirap Zangmo, and this is just this interview. So it says, okay, Western student asks, when was the first time you met Tsoknyi Rinpoche in person? Now, Tsoknyi Rinpoche, who you might know, who presently lives in, I think it's in Crestone, Colorado, and who has actually, several of his teachings have actually been translated. A lot of his teaching have been translated, and he's been very active in terms of teaching Buddhism in the U.S. and in the West. He traditionally is actually the main lama of Gebchak monastery, and that sort of the main lama of that region. So this woman was a student of the previous Tsoknyi Rinpoche. So being asked when was the first time you met Tsoknyi Rinpoche in person, then she says, when I was young, I met the second Tsoknyi. When I was young, the second Tsoknyi Rinpoche came to Gebchak to attend the Mindrup making Drupchen. I don't remember what age I was then. Do you remember all the qualities of the second Tsoknyi Rinpoche? Now this is also because this interview is conducted by some students of Tsoknyi Rinpoche, who are, I think probably some of you might have come across the movie called Blessings, which is then the story of Tsoknyi Rinpoche's journey to Chögyam and the region around it. So this would have been in the about 15-20 years ago. Anyway, so the interviewer says, "Do you remember all the qualities of the second Tsogni?" He had very great qualities. "Do you distinguish between meditation and post-meditation?" She says, "There is absolutely no difference between resting in meditation or post-meditation. It is like looking upward at a clear blue sky. There's no difference whatsoever. When I get sick, in my body, there is some pain, but in the mind, there's no difference." How many years did it take to achieve this state? At the time when I was staying in Chulen, in dark retreat, I received visions of Yeshe Tsogyal and Tsangyang Gyatso. Within the vision, I became inseparable from Tsangyang Gyatso. I instantly understood the nature of mind. So Chulen it's a practice of extracting essence. Typically, the practitioners hardly eat anything, but they take essence from particular plants and sometimes even certain minerals. And this vision was of Yeshe Tsogyal, Padmasambhava's main student, and Tsangyang Gyatso was then the first, if not I think probably the first Tsogni Rinpoche. So he's very important in that context. So then the interviewer says, "Other than that, did you receive instructions on the nature of mind from a Lama?" "No, I received it directly in retreat. At that time, I felt strong faith and devotion. I cried. The mind which grasped the object and the object all dissolved into the nature of mind." Do you have any advice for students who don't have the same level of faith? Really, there is no other way than this. You have to meditate and supplicate the Lama with faith. There's no way you can say mind is like this and get it. You must believe in the Lama and supplicate the Lama well, generate compassion for all sentient beings, and check your mind yourself. When you die, what will you see? What experience will you have? I don't know. Going to the Pure Lands is nothing special when you are established in the nature of mind. I have no hopes, fears, or doubts about going to the Pure Lands. Are you able to go to the Pure Lands like Dewachen or Sukhavati, Amitabha's Pure Land, or see the copper-colored mountain, Guru Rinpoche's Pure Land? There is no special place to go if you have the Buddha nature within your own mind. Dewachen is within your own mind. For people in the West who are not Buddhist and who don't understand practice or realization, what are the benefits of having this mind? Once you have recognized and experienced the nature of mind, then you engage in the practice of Mahamudra and Dzogchen. After some time, all suffering will go and all negative emotions will disappear. If you really know the nature of mind, there is no suffering. How does this benefit others? Having realized the nature of mind, which is in essence the mind of bodhicitta, the mind that wishes to benefit others and lead them from suffering, you can be of great benefit to others. Are the aspirations of someone who has realized the nature of mind more powerful than someone who has not? Yes, the aspiration or prayers of someone who has realized the nature of mind are hundreds of millions of times more powerful than someone who has not realized it. Can you describe your perception of the world? What arises in my mind now is the thought to benefit others. On the other hand, I don't cling to appearances as real. Do they appear like in a dream? Yes, they do appear illusory like a dream. Sherpa, if you decide to leave soon, please be reborn quickly among us, and please remember the aspiration of Aryatara to take female form and return as a Gipchak Gurn nun. Okay. It seems as though if I truly understood suffering, there is nothing I could do but practice. Is there anything you can say to help me understand suffering? The suffering of sentient beings is well described in many of the classical texts. If we meditate on these teachings, we can really recognize the suffering of sentient beings. In the 6 realms, there are many types of suffering. There is not one day of bliss in any of them. Other than meditating like this, there is not much to do. Do you have any final advice? If one really supplicates the Lama repeatedly, with faith, and checks one's own mind over a long period of time, then you can directly realize the nature of mind. The accomplishment of practice really relies on oneself. Supplicate the Lama repeatedly, and when your mind becomes distracted, bring your mind back. If you continually supplicate the Lama, whether winter or summer, one can receive the blessings. I will pray for all of you that you will practice well, attain enlightenment, and bring benefits to others. Okay, so there's a few questions here. Is this the son of Tulku Rinpoche? Yes, that's right. And then the Tsoknyi Rinpoche lives in Kathmandu as well as Tibet. Yeah. Okay. I think he also has a place in Colorado. And the Getchak nuns are located in Muktinath, Nepal, and Getchak Ling Nunnery is in Choba Hill, Kathmandu. Yes, that's right. But there is also a monastery then in a place called Nangchen in eastern Tibet. Thank you so much for sharing this. I believe she died and left relics, didn't she? I think so, yes. So, thank you. Yes, good. Yeah. Yes, this is an extraordinary lineage, and this place in eastern Tibet is quite special. The whole Nangchen is a place where it's also where Tulku Rinpoche came from. Many very great practitioners there. So then we'll return to this, and this house is sort of actually with that as point of departure. Then we've completed really invoking the lineage of the great masters. So this is on what page is this? It doesn't say what page, but it's in the beginning of the book, just at the what's called crying to the gurus. So with that invoking the teacher and really this perspective of devotion, then there is now what we very often do with calling the teacher from afar and also lineage supplications and so on, is that we invoke the teachers. And then there's some things that we supplicate in terms of us gaining realization. Now, what we have in the West or in the modern world is very much this intellectual notion of having a point of view, an opinion, a sense of our present psychological direction. And this we would say, this is what I am. Now in Buddhism, we operate with the humble recognition that there's a big condition of delusion that takes place. And on the basis of this delusion, we experience various realms, various conditions that, as we saw here, are painful. And when this mind is recognized, then all pain and all delusion is gone. So there's, you could say, the two realities of samsara and the reality of enlightenment. And right now, within the reality of samsara, then we are stuck within, you could say, a limited individual consciousness that is driven very much by self-centering, and which is continually afflicted by toxic conditions of mind. And this is not even particularly a value judgment. This is just how it is. We have this illness. Of course, we don't think about it, and as an illness, we think that's just normal. But this is really where suffering originates. And so on the path, then we operate with gradually eliminating this confused condition. And this we do on the basis of first understanding our condition, being willing to actually listen to those who have gone before us and understand what is this nature, what can be done about it, where does it come from, and so on. And this then takes us to a place of beginning to practice meditation in order to eliminate this confusion and to unveil the innate disposition. But in doing so, we operate with what we could call three stages really on this path. I know this is very often talked about in many different ways, but one way of doing it in terms of what Anisha Zangmo was just talking about in terms of realization, we first say before realization, we have to have understanding. So for example, presently, for us to actually gain some experience, we first have to have understanding. We can't go to the path and just begin to do all sorts of methods and things and, practices without having a clear understanding. And on the basis of that understanding and then practicing, we gain experience. And that's where we begin to no longer be caught in the ordinary patterns. And once we have experience, then the path begins to really take on a great momentum. And then it's on the basis of experience that then finally the stage is realization, which is something from which we don't return. We would say up until realization, our condition of confusion very easily returns. So realization is then when we reach a place of no more returning. So initially, humbly, we need to acknowledge our condition and work with that. Just like if we have a curable illness, we work with that. So here, Jamgon Control is then going to take that this is then the beginning, you could say, basically outlining what we need to do in terms of the path. So he supplicating then the teachers that we've been looking at. Then he says, alas, sentient beings like myself, evildoers with bad karma, have wandered in samsara from beginningless time. Even now we experience endless suffering, and not even an instant of remorse has occurred. Guru, think of me. Look upon me quickly with compassion. Grant your blessings so that I give rise to renunciation from my depths. So when we say evildoers, this is not that we're intrinsically evil, but it's just that we're confused, and on the basis of that, we do some actions that drive suffering for ourselves and for others. And these are patterns. This is what we could call bad karma. It's not that we're intrinsically possessed by bad karma, but it's just we've got a bad thing going. We have a bad pattern. We have a pattern that's not particularly helpful. So this is absolutely curable, but we need to start off acknowledging step one. We have a problem here. So we recognize then the condition of samsara, and we supplicate the teacher that we might develop what we call renunciation. Now, renunciation means a determination. So renunciation means to get our priorities right, and that's then the determination to be free. So the Tibetan word is nginjung, which means arriving at certainty, and it can be understood in terms of renunciation, like giving up things that we're attached to that cause us difficulties. But it is also permeated by this sense of direction, knowing what we need to do and being determined to do it. Although I have obtained a free and well-favored human birth, I have wasted it in vain. I am constantly distracted by the activities of this futile life. Unable to accomplish the great objective of liberation and overcome by laziness, I return empty-handed from a land of jewels. Guru, think of me, look upon me quickly with compassion. Grant your blessings so that I fulfill my purpose of human birth. So Buddhist reflection, and this is, you could say, reflection, these are thoughts that we think about, is very much permeated by this humility that acknowledges we are confused. Very often when we present ourselves in a social context, we like to sort of present our intelligent view and present ourselves as intelligent, interesting people. And what we're doing on the path is not particularly about promoting ourselves. It's very much on the basis of us actually acknowledging where it is that there's a pebble in the shoe, where it is that something needs to be done. And that's obviously not with the fact that we're very intelligent and interesting and unique and, you know, have great charisma, but it's about us actually recognizing where we're going wrong. And being reborn a human is, in the scheme of things, extremely rare. And that's why we acknowledge that not recognizing this, we have wasted it. It's not ultimately wasted, but it's just that we acknowledge that presently we've been caught in some time waste. And that's where we, with the recognition of that, understanding the futility, then we recognize that unless we do something, then we're going to return empty-handed from a land of jewels. And the land of jewels is this present existence. We might not think of it like that, but from the Buddhist point of view, in terms of, or rather from the, you could say, scientific point of view that recognizes and understands the scope of consciousness and what confused consciousness entails, then being reborn as a human is extremely rare. And that's where we've won the lottery. And that's where we supplicate the teacher that we may be able to actually fulfill the purpose of our existence. So this is the also what we call the first of the four thoughts that change the mind, recognizing the rare opportunity of the human rebirth. Okay, so that's from the devotional liturgy, and then we'll go to the what is it again? The text. So if you haven't been in this study before, just to clarify, this book has a section in the beginning, which is a devotional liturgy, and that's what we've presently been looking at. But now we get to the actual, we'll continue the study of the book. So this is the chapter on the Buddha families. And again, I think we mentioned last time also something Chögyam Trungpa makes a point about is that this is not like the zodiac where, where people would say, hey, you're a Libra or you're such a Scorpio or whatever it might be. This is, and it's also not like the Jungian archetypes. This is about recognizing the purity that's innate. So it's not, with the archetypes we would recognize various styles of psychology, but this is actually beyond ordinary psychology. This is more about the innate purity of our Buddha nature. And in that sense, this purity can be seen having various qualities. And so we speak about the Buddha families in terms of our subjective experience within, but we also associate it with the outer elements. So while we talk about our Buddha nature being permeated by the five families, or predominantly some of the five families, or one of the five families, then also we would see the realm and the surrounding world in terms of these families, basically connected to the five elements. So Trungpa Rinpoche here says the fifth family is called the Buddha family. It is associated with the element of space. So we have the five elements being earth, water, fire, wind, and space. And these are then associated with the previous Buddha families. The last one here now, the Buddha family is associated with the element of space. Trungpa Rinpoche continues. Buddha energy is the foundation or the basic space. It is the environment or oxygen that makes it possible for the other principles to function. It has a sedate, solid quality. Persons in this family have a strong sense of contemplative experience, and they are highly meditative. Buddha neurosis is the quality of being spaced out rather than spacious. So we differentiate in the terms of these qualities. We talk about the enlightened aspect, but then also when they're distorted through confusion, then they have a neurotic aspect. So sometimes we would recognize that we have a particular style in terms of our neurosis, but then we also understand that this neurotic style has its very intrinsic nature is then purity, and that's why we talk about the purity of the Buddha families. So we talk about, on one hand, the purity aspect, and the other hand, the neurotic aspect. So in this case, the neurotic aspect is this quality of being spaced out rather than spacious, which is then the pure aspect. Trungpa Rinpoche continues, it is often associated with an unwillingness to express ourselves. For example, we might see that our neighbors are destroying our picket fence with a sledgehammer. We hear them and we see them. In fact, we have been watching our neighbors at work all day, continually smashing our picket fence. But instead of reacting, we just observe them, and then we return to our snug little home. We eat our breakfast, lunch, and dinner and ignore what they're doing. We're paralyzed, unable to talk to outsiders. Another quality of Buddha neurosis is that we couldn't be bothered. Our dirty laundry is piled up in a corner of our room. Sometimes we use our dirty laundry to wipe up spills on the floor or table, and then we put it back in the same pile. As time goes by, our dirty socks become unbearable, but we just sit there. This is actually very helpful because this enables us to identify this Buddha neurosis as it plays out in others. We might say to such a person, this person is particularly messy. And we might actually have sort of an aversion to that, but we could very well just say, okay, well, this is a this is a case of Buddha neurosis. So there's sort of hope in that particular scenario. If we're embarking on a political career, our colleagues may suggest that we develop a certain project and expand our organization. If we have Buddha neurosis, we'll choose to develop the idea that needs the least effort. We do not want to deal directly with the details of handling reality. Entertaining friends is also a hassle. We prefer to take our friends to a restaurant rather than cook in our home. And if we want to have a love affair, instead of seducing a partner, talking to him or her and making friends, we just look for somebody who is already keen on us. We cannot be bothered with talking somebody into something. Sometimes we feel we are sinking into the earth, the solid mud and earth. Sometimes we feel good because we think we are the most stable person in the universe. We slowly begin to grin to ourselves, smile at ourselves, because we are the best person of all. We are the only person who manages to stay stable. But sometimes we feel that we are the loneliest person in the whole universe. We do not particularly like to dance. And when we are asked to dance with somebody, we feel embarrassed and uncomfortable. We want to stay in our own little corner. When the ignoring quality of Buddha neurosis is transmuted into wisdom, it becomes an environment of all-pervasive spaciousness. This enlightened aspect is called the wisdom of all-encompassing space. In itself, it might have a somewhat desolate and empty quality, but at the same time, it is a quality of complete open potential. It can accommodate anything. It is spacious and vast like the sky. In tantric iconography, the 5 Buddha families are arrayed in the center and the 4 cardinal points of a mandala. The mandala of the 5 Buddha families, of course, represent their wisdom or enlightened aspect. Traditionally, the Buddha family is in the center. That is to say, in the center there is a basic coordination and basic wisdom of Buddha, which is symbolized by a wheel and the color white. Vajra is in the east, because Vajra is connected with the dawn. It's also connected with the color blue and is symbolized by the Vajra scepter. It is the experience of it is the sharpness of experience. As in the morning when we wake up, we begin to see the dawn, when light is first reflected on the world, as a symbol of awakening reality. Ratna is in the south. It is connected with richness and is symbolized by a jewel and the color yellow. Ratna is connected with the midday, when we begin to need refreshment and nourishment. Padma is in the west and is symbolized by the lotus and the color red. As our day gets older, we also have to relate with recruiting a lover. It is time to socialize, to make a date with our lover, or if we have fallen in love with an antique, or if we have fallen in love with some clothing, it is time to go out and buy it. The last family is Kama in the north. It is symbolized by a sword and the color green. Finally, we have captured the whole situation. We have everything we need, and there is nothing more than that. We have brought our merchandise back home, or our lover back home, and we say, let's close the door, let's lock it. So the mandala of the 5 Buddha families represent the progress of a whole day or a whole course of action. I can't help but think of Tongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, who will discuss the different stages we have in life. And particularly with regards to the Padma neurosis, here we are talking about it, and this is spoken in the 70s to a rather young audience. Tongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, he makes the comments that at the first early stage of life, what is it we're very interested in lovers. Then there's a later stage in life, I think, where we collect tablecloths and salt shakers. so the different kinds of loves that we have at different stages. Anyway, so that's where we have these so that's where we have these 5 families and their particular styles. And these are also associated with course, particular actions that we need to engage in terms of benefiting other sentient beings and so on. So there's a lot of, when you come across Vajrayana, you come across a lot of references to these mandalas. They're quite specific, by the way. Sort of in the 60s, with the encounter of tantric iconography, they developed sort of a notion that let's make mandalas, and people would get out sort of they'd get very creative and make sort of things that looked a bit like mandalas and so on. But the mandala principles are actually quite precise, and that's something that we come across in Vajrayana and Tantrism, is there's a lot of precision in terms of how this exactly operates in terms of specific deities and specific mandalas. So mandala is not something we sort of just sit down and we sort of make a mandala, but it's very much something that we're invited into. We outsiders, not yet having seen clearly, we can be invited into a mandala, which is also what we'll be looking at in I think the next chapter, which is Abhisheka. So this whole realm of enlightened perspective in terms of the 5 families is something that the teacher then conveys to us, and we apprentice with the teacher and learn about the actual experience and living within this mandala. Trungpa then says, without understanding the 5 Buddha families, we have no working basis to relate with Tantra, and we find ourselves alienated from Tantra. Tantra is seen as such an outrageous thing, which seems to have no bearing on us as individuals. We may feel the Vajrayana is purely a distant aim, a distant goal, so it is necessary to study the 5 Buddha principles. They provide a bridge between tantric experience and everyday life. Also, what's implicit here is that we don't right away engage the tantric vision. There has to be preparation, and this preparation is not just intellectual or going through a few evening school classes, but it's really a process that takes years, and that's why we have the Vajrayana foundations for this to become real and not just another, you could say, flirtation. Then there is a real process of actually engaging this whole different perspective and this whole different experience, which is then provided through the process of the tantric preliminaries. Trungpa says it's necessary to understand and relate with the 5 Buddha principles before we begin tantric disciplines, so that we can begin to understand what Tantra is all about. If Tantra is a mystical experience, how can we relate it to our ordinary everyday life at home? There could be a big gap between tantric experience and day-to-day life. But it is possible, by understanding the 5 Buddha families, to close the gap. Working with the Buddha families, we discover that we already have certain qualities. According to the tantric perspective, we cannot ignore them, and we cannot reject them and try to be something else. We have our aggression and our passion and our jealousy and our resentment and our ignorance, or whatever we have. We belong to certain Buddha families already, and we cannot reject them. We should work with our neurosis, relate with them, and experience them properly. They are the only potential we have, and when we begin to work with them, we see that we can use them as stepping stones. So this potential is something that we abide by, and you could say the whole Buddhist path is about uncovering this potential of clarity that's innate to what we are, covered by a condition of confusion. The more we engage in advanced practice, and this particularly then applies to something like Vajrayana, the more the gap between our ordinary experience and the path, you could say this gap closes in. And there's very little difference between our practice and our everyday experience. And that is the implication of Vajrayana practice, is that it seamlessly engages with what we are. We might think that if we go to a Zen temple, that's real simplicity, but that still involves that we actually sit in a very rarefied condition of the Zen temple, and we might think we need to go to the hills or the mountains and have simplicity, and then we come back and we resent the lack of simplicity in our busy ordinary life, and that's where there's a gap happening. And the beauty of Tantra is that it engages whatever reality there is. It sees these qualities of the 5 Buddha families in every aspect of our existence. So we needn't go somewhere else. But of course, initially it is quite helpful to before we actually fully engage this experience in this way of practicing the path, that we have an actual understanding and we have an actual foundation for doing this. And that is where practices like the Nundro are indispensable. On your left, by the way, is someone called Chögyam. And this is just because we, in the context of crying to the gurus, then we went through all the various lineage masters, and then also Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, and then Jamgon Kongtrul. But there was one more pal in there, a very great guru called Chögyam. And Chögyam's teachings are widely practiced. The teachings from Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo and from Jamgon Kongtrul and from Chögyam are very much practiced jointly, particularly within this particular Sangha, our Siddhartha's Intent Sangha. Then the teachings from Khyentse Wangpo, Kongtrul and Chögyam are continually come up. For example, we have the practice of Korwa Dongduk, which is a treasure from Chögyam. And yet, because it was arranged in a particular way by Khyentse Wangpo, then we sort of include that as being part of the Khyentse Wangpo's, you could say, lineage, and so on. And also, so many of the practices that we have were organized by Jamgon Kongtrul. For example, in the Chetsu Nyingtik and some of the other Mundros, then we have the arrangement by and commentaries, explanation by Jamgon Kongtrul. So we talk about what in Tibetan is called Khen Kong Choksum, which means Khyentse, Kongtrul, and Chokling, which are these three that they very much work together. Anyway, just so you know, this is a great lineage master, and it's a lot of wonderful stories really about Khyentse and Kongtrul and Chögyam, how they work together. We say, for example, that Chögyam and Jamgon and Chögyam and Khyentse Wangpo, they had what you call a treasure revelation, individually on their own, and then when they compared them, put them together and showed them to each other, they were identical. So this is what we call the Tutu Bache Kunsel, which actually was a joint treasure of Chögyam and Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo. Anyway, and this particular teaching, like I say, it's still practiced very widely in Chögyam's teachings are very practiced very widely in both the Nyingma context and also in the Kaji tradition, particularly the Karma Kaji. Okay. I'll just start the chapter on Abhisheka before we do the questions and answers. Abhisheka. So Trungpa Rinpoche says, in an earlier chapter, we discussed the basic meaning of transmission. At this point, we could go further in our understanding and discuss some of the details. Basically, transmission is the meeting of two minds. Understanding this is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, there is no way out and no way in. There's no way to enter the Vajrayana, even if you have already been trained in the basic Buddhist teachings. The formal experience of transmission takes place at a ceremony which is called an Abhisheka. The particular form of the Abhisheka that we receive is suited to our own basic being or basic psychological state. And it also depends on the particular level of tantric practice that is appropriate for us. So altogether, there is a need to respect the nature of transmission itself, the form of transmission, and also a need to respect our own attitude in receiving transmission. So again, this is where we are talking about a very personal, not institutionalized approach. It is simply not possible really to approach the path in terms of just reading books. There has to be some interaction with actual events, living persons, and actually engaging with a teacher. And transmission of Abhisheka is something that would take place after quite a substantial apprenticeship with a teacher, and it's not something that we would just immediately rush into. So a fair bit of work comes before the Abhisheka. The study of the path, there's practice of the preliminaries, the Nundro, and a lot needs to be really, you could say, foundations need to be laid. So at this point, then, you could say Abhisheka is sort of up in the future. There's not a whole need for a lot of speculation about it. But at the same time, this is a bit like when we're growing up. People will say, what are you going to become when you grow up? Or what are you going to do? And there is sort of up there ahead a place where something's going to happen. So there is a need for understanding it, and also a need for developing, you could say, a respect for this, the logic that's basic to us. And that to transmission, there's a need for understanding what Abhisheka is. And this actually needs to be put in place from the very start of the journey. It is very much about engaging the enlightened perspective, and particularly then engaging with a teacher. So Trungpa Rinpoche says, in order to receive transmission, we must be willing to commit ourselves to the fundamental trust, or the potential for trust, that exists as the working basis of the student-teacher relationship. This attitude of trust is extremely important in Tantra. When we speak of trust in the Tantric sense, we mean the actual experience of trusting in ourselves. There's a sense of genuine compassion toward ourselves, but without any self-indulgence. We are gentle and straightforward, but we are no longer playing the game of idiot compassion, using false kindness to protect ourselves unnecessarily. We also are completely free of spiritual materialism. There is a sense of 100% fresh air. Things are clear and there is circulation, freshness, and understanding in our system. Our life feels quite okay. There is nothing to worry about, nothing to be concerned about. That does not mean that all our problems have been solved and that everything's milk and honey. There is still a sense of trouble, a struggle, but it has become very healthy. It is a learning process, a working process. In fact, struggle becomes the fuel for the bright burning flames of our energy. So again, this is where there needs to be some groundwork needs to be done so that we arrive at this place that Trungpa Rinpoche is describing in terms of we've cleaned up our act and we're comfortable with who we are. The reference here to idiot compassion is when we operate still within a very impoverished sense of what I need and what I require in terms of sustaining this comfort zone. And that's where idiot compassion is essentially having compassion for our need for just being reassured and sort of being lulled into a sense of comfort within a place that's not at all healthy, which is not at all constructive, and that is our habitual comfort zone. So that's where there needs to be some clarity that takes place. And this, of course, this might sound sort of as if idiot compassion might sound as if it doesn't have compassion, but it has tremendous compassion, but just not for the right, but not for the wrong thing. So having genuine compassion for ourselves, it's a bit like we say, you know, if you teach someone to fish, what is it they say? Then they're sort of good for the rest of their lives, right? You feed them one day, they're good right now, but that's right. Yeah, you give them a fish or you give them a rod, and that's why you might think it's compassionate to just give them a fish, but actually enabling them to achieve autonomy. That's the thing, and for us to achieve autonomy is so important. So this is genuine compassion to ourselves, and that involves something that is extremely beautiful because it's about getting beyond the normal insecurity, the poverty mentality that's basic to spiritual materialism, and something that enables us to come clean, to be completely who we potentially are. And that's what also, again, the tantric preliminaries are about. And this is what enables us then to actually become genuine practitioners of Vajrayana. Maybe let's just see, we can leave it at that and see if there's some questions. Looks like there's a few. Thank you so much. Really nice advice. Supplicating the Lama means to pray to him or her and ask for blessings. Yes. And again, like we've seen here, this devotion should come with an element of also this autonomy. That devotion is not just about an external savior, but also about tapping into a dimension of wisdom that is innate to us, which is what the teacher is pointing to. So that's where, on the basis of this devotion and openness, and on the basis of the teacher's wisdom and capacity, then there is the possibility of this conditional blessing to take place. Someone's asking where to find the movie Blessings. I'm not sure, actually. It's a woman called Victress Hitchcock, if I'm not wrong. I think she might be in the family of Alfred, but Victress Hitchcock, I think so. And if you Googled Soknyi and blessings, I would think it would come up. Which deity is associated with Buddha family? Which deity is associated with Buddha family? Manjushri, Yamantaka, particularly, yeah. Yeah, some others, I'm sure. Would Buddha time of day be night or midnight? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe midnight? Guessing here. Are the 5 Buddha families described for practitioners to understand which family they are or belong to? Not particularly. Of course, yes, this comes about when we're emphasizing particular practice that needs to be undertaken. So we might at a particular time be a particular Buddha family, and this could be something that runs as a theme through our life. We could say this particular deity is suited for us, but also sometimes the Buddha families are taught for us to understand just the purity that's basic also to others. Like I was saying, I think of a friend of mine who pretty much lives the whole scenario with the laundry piling up in the middle of the room and so on. And it kind of provides a sense of humor and a perspective that is, okay, here we have Buddha neurosis, or somebody who's continually very cutting and sharp. And there's the Vajra quality, and that's where you can begin to appreciate that there's a potential for so I'm just getting messages that the audio went out for a moment, but I think it's back. Okay. Question: do we need to investigate about which family belong? No, there's not really a need for that. This will sort of it's just to know that this is you could say in the equation, but we don't need to particularly sort of begin to define ourselves or others as a matter of fact. Who are the holders of Chögyam Olympus lineage, please? I know about Sikit Choling Rinpoche, Nathan Choling Rinpoche, Pamchok Rinpoche. Anyone else, please? Urgent Topgyal Rinpoche. And yeah, so present day holders there is Sikit Can you hear me now? Your screen has frozen. Sound is back. Bingo, we're good. Yes, you're back. Great. Okay, so we're back. Okay, somebody was asking about the Olympus lineage. Well, pretty much that these are the, in outside of Tibet. In Tibet, you have other Choling Rinpoches, and there are overall everybody's practicing Chögyam teachings, but the ones you mentioned, they're pretty much the main lineage holders, certainly outside of Tibet. And then particularly also we need to include OT Rinpoche, Untitled Rinpoche. I still have a hard time understanding that human birth is very rare, seeming how many of us humans are on the planet right now. Yeah, but that's like, you could say if you live in an anthill, then you might just think, this is my world, this anthill is full of other ants like me. But it's a very large universe out there. In fact, if you stand and look up at the night sky, you try and wonder where it all ends, right? So we need to incorporate the notion of infinitude and the notion of just things being vast. And so just like where there's a lot of humans just where I live here, there's probably twice as many creatures under the ground. So being born as a human is very rare, and particularly being born a human where we have the leisure to encounter the teaching and practice it. You can see how many actually have the luxury to sit down and spend an hour studying Buddhism via a webinar. Very few people. Very few people have you could say, the education, the conditions to understand the validity of this, etc., etc., etc. So that's why we talk about the rare human rebirth. But in terms of just understanding the infinite beings there are in the universe, humans, they're very few, and then even fewer who can work with their conditions as we do through the practice of the Dharma. What does Trungpa mean in a practical sense when we say we should work with our neurosis? Very good question. That is the practice of the path. So we don't just say, oh, I am like this, like I'm really an angry person, or I'm really a stubborn person, I'm really like this and like that. And very often this sort of becomes part of our personality. I'm so-and-so, ha, 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 ha. And it's almost as if we define ourselves in terms of our neurosis, and we are in one way or another. So that's where it attains some sense of solidity. So, but if we in any way, unless we're incredibly desensitized, we understand that our neurosis is what drives our suffering. This fixation on me is what drives our suffering. So we need to do something about that. So when we say we should work with our neurosis, it means that we should work with eliminating the cause of suffering. We should work with our neurosis in terms of basically purifying it, eliminating the delusional aspect, which is our ignorance. We should begin to actually look. What we normally do is that we don't work with our neurosis. That's the practice of ignorance. We just turn the other way, like the like the guy with the picket fence, right? It's like, oh yeah, it's just happening. So that's where working with neurosis is the entire purpose of the path. Yeah, are you well today, Jakob? I missed the first couple of minutes. I'm very well, thank you. I hope you are too. I thought idiot compassion meant more in the direction of compassion without wisdom. Well, yes, same thing. Like you have compassion for a person, but when you go to help them, you do not have the skillful means to really help them. That's right, but this also applies to ourselves. So we need to have the skillful means to extract ourselves from our sort of habituation to a particular neurosis. How do we discover which family we're associated with? Well, that's like I said before, we shouldn't be too worried about that. Let's just say we are all 5. What are the 5 certainties? Are they associated with the 5 Buddha families? Not particularly. This is something else. Then whenever you hear a teaching, it starts off, thus have I heard, right? Evam Maya Shutram. And that is where then the sutra begins with, once the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha Peak, we have then the place, we have the time, we have the teacher, we have the assembly, and we have the teaching. So these are the 5 certainties. This is something that also applies in all the various teachings that we have in Buddhism. So these are what we call 5 certainties. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so somebody's just, for those who wanted to find blessings, someone here is telling us blessings. The Dzogchen Nangchen Nuns of Tibet is available on Amazon. Yeah. Blessings, the Dzogchen Nangchen Nuns of Tibet. If human birth is so rare, how are the humans that seem to filled with evil make it here in the human realm? Well, these are just the causes and conditions. There might be some conditions that somebody is reborn as a human and at the same time they have an evil disposition. So again, this has so much to do with the way that our delusion plays out. So we're a mixed bag. We might have, like they sometimes say, good people do bad things and bad people do good things. We're a mixed bag. And so we could very well have, I mean, obviously we then have conditions for being born a human, and yet we have, negative dispositions. But, we say filled with evil. It's hard for us to know. Filled with evil if we begin to analyze what is this evil, it's complex again. So we need to understand really it's not black and white. That's an important message. How could you share the article that you read on the nun? Oh yeah, could you share the article that you read? Yeah, I'll do that. Okay. So by working or actually looking at the neurosis, is it by looking at it over and over that the neurosis will soften and lessen? No. Here we are working in a Buddhist context. So we practice meditation, which is discovering the space in which neurosis plays out. And when we discover the space in which neurosis plays out, we discover that it doesn't actually have a lot of traction. The more space we give it, the more we can actually see it for what it is, the less we're actually driven by it. And that's where we, like in psychotherapy or the traditional sort of Western format of analysis and psychology, there is a lot of value in looking at the neurosis from the point of view of what Western psychology can do. So that's where the best you can do is begin to understand your case history, understanding the conditions, and you could say looking at it over and over. And yes, in that sense, there is a possibility of some process. But here it's different. Here we're approaching this from the point of view of an intrinsic purity that's basic to us. Not in terms of philosophically assessing that, but in terms of experience. And when we sit down to meditate, we do so with a sense of just being present without the history of the past really having an issue. We are present, and whatever thoughts that arise, they arise within a space where there's no obligation to sort of tag along with it or to begin to objectify it as something that we need to ruminate over or think about and so forth. So that's where the practice of meditation is radical. And also the outcome of the practice meditation is radical in terms of what it understands about our basic nature. And that's why for example, when mindfulness is taught, we can't just teach it in terms of a theory, it has to be experienced. So this goes vastly beyond anything that's known within our sort of native culture of psychology. And so that's where the practice of meditation is absolutely essential when we are approaching the Buddhist path. So for us to work with all of this that we're talking about here, the practice of sitting meditation is absolutely essential. I'm stating the obvious. You have heard this before, but it's sometimes we lose it and then we think that there's a project here and there's a project there. But in fact, when it comes to the Dharma, it's very much it covers all our aspects, and then the application of it, you could say the applied science of this really is the practice of meditation. How can we cultivate trust in the teacher in terms of Vajrayana, please? on the sutra level, how to check the Buddha's teaching, for example, law of karma. Well, there is a difference between what we could call the sutra teachings, which very much appeals to our rationality. So there we engage with the teachings through our rational muscle. The whole teaching that we have in terms of epistemology, ontology, and so on in the sutra teachings, understanding our reality, how can we assess the method of our understanding, and so on, that entirely operates on, you could say, rational premises. But of course, that what we're looking at lies beyond just the intellectual exercises as such. And so the experience of the path and the real objective of the path goes beyond ordinary rationality. It's about something much deeper. And that is the scope of the Vajrayana. So with the Vajrayana, we're working on the foundation of the sutra, what we call view or insight or rational hard intelligence. But we begin to work with that which is beyond the ordinary intellect. And that's where we're connecting with a teacher that embodies enlightenment. And this is where we need to be very first careful in terms of engaging with someone like that. But once we have engaged with somebody that is trustworthy, then we need to also be wary of our own habitual projections. And that's where it's important for us when we then are on the Vajrayana that we continually aspire to trust the teacher and have faith in the teacher, because we wouldn't ordinarily be able to really appreciate the teacher. We might think we really have devotion, but it's not until we actually are at a great level of you could say, of realization that we actually truly can understand the teacher's worth. Just like unless we're a really great piano player, we won't really understand the value of somebody that sits down and plays, an incredible piece by, Rachmaninoff or something like that. We'll just say, hey, that was great. But if you're a really great musician, you'll go, whoa, that was really an incredible delivery, right? So we continually work with cultivating this trust. Rinpoche, he once gave an example that he said, I pray to my teachers that I may have trust in them, which might sound like a catch-22 or funny, but no, it's actually true. And we should aspire that we might continually develop our appreciation for the teacher. So simply just, you could say, cultivating this, or rather practicing this aspiration. I have a question about tantric iconography and how this transpires into our personal experience. The motor cortex of our brain houses mirror neurons, and science now demonstrates the power of visualization into experiential action. How does the image of Buddha and Yidap's and Yabyum sexual union relate to our practice and study of the mind as we take refuge in these representations? Sorry, the long question. Well, it's very difficult to mix up these two modalities of Western neuroscience, which is a very new science. And so as much as neuroscience is sort of excited about its latest findings, it still operates within, you'd say, a rather confined science. And so indeed, you can say there's a lot of interesting correlation between the mind and brain. But again, we come down to what is really the primacy of it, and indeed the primacy of our experience. And still, it doesn't really understand the whole scope of enlightenment. So that's, you could say, a weakness for you could say, to bring neuroscience to the Buddhist project is fine. Nobody's objecting to that, but it's not really the ideal tool. Interestingly enough, the best tool is actually our personal experience. Now, the Yabyum image really is like in the old India, it was kept secret because there was you could say, a multicultural in which something like the Yabyum image would be misunderstood. In Tibet, however, it was very monocultural, and for that reason, the Tibetans were very relaxed about the Yabyum image. And it's not really something that anybody gets particularly, it's not like you know, erotica or something, that it's sort of, we get turned on by seeing yab-yum images. It's simply just symbolizing the highest bliss. And it's the highest bliss of non-duality. Whereas an ordinary sentient being operates with duality in the sense of I and other, and as a result struggles. The whole interaction with the other is permeated by struggle, because it's me and the other, and the hard work involved, the frustration involved. And I'm not just talking about other persons, but the whole phenomenal other as the sort of the whole other as the phenomenal world. The yogi, however, for the yogi, there is an understanding that the whole display of other is in fact non-dual, and it's bliss. In fact, from the yogi's point of view, the whole interaction with other is bliss. And so for the yogi, every interaction is blissful. The yogi is never caught up in this self-centering and the conditions of self-centering. And so there is a freedom and a bliss that we don't have as an ordinary sentient beings. With self-centering, there's continual trouble. With the experience of non-duality, the yogi experiences the interaction with other as bliss. And so that's why the sexual union is the union, or the symbol for this interaction with the other as being bliss. It's a very appropriate image, because it is very much we ourselves, and that's again this sexual union. We ourselves, we struggle with the other, with the whole phenomenal world. But occasionally there's one special somebody that comes along and becomes a significant other for longer or shorter time, and we might engage with that person in a sexual way, which is then, we could argue, possibly the highest bliss we could come about. And then certainly that's the implication of the yab-yum image. And that's where we let one individual in. So we kind of understand how the dance with the phenomenal world can be seen in terms of a dance with a partner. But of course here we are not referring to the sexual act as such, but rather just the non-dual experience in which the phenomenal world of other is experienced without the ordinary, you could say, confusion and contamination of duality. So I hope that makes sense. So still we're going a little bit over time. I hope that's all right. You say, don't worry if we don't get to know our Buddha family, but Trungpa Rinpoche, if we don't, we can't engage in Vajrayana. Yeah, no, but it's more understanding the 5 Buddha family principle. That's very helpful. It's not that we need to know our particular family at this point. How to work with undercurrent thoughts in meditation. We need to do that. This is not going to be the scope of this, this question and answer session, but it's something we talk a lot about, and it's something that is, you have so many instructions on that. So I would very much encourage you to, here in Siddhartha's Intent, there's on Mondays I give some meditation instruction. There's a lot of recordings of that, and also Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche has given a lot of, Chögyam Trungpa more than anybody really trusted the Western capacity for meditation, and it's given a lot of instruction in meditation that's very helpful. So, but as much as you could, try and find a living teacher, and otherwise I would recommend the writings by Chögyam Trungpa. There's one text that's called Mindfulness in Action. Not meditation in action, mindfulness in action. That's very helpful. I don't know where I can learn about these more. Yeah, well, it'll come. It's just, presently we are learning a little bit about it. We are learning about it. So just whenever you need to know about the 5 Buddha families, come back to this chapter. Blessings is available in the US Amazon, but not compatible with Australian zoning to purchase. Oh dear. So, sorry. What a wonderful path. Yes. Thank you. So it's not about lessening the neurosis, but creating a mind that no longer goes along with it. You can say that, yes. And that's also where the perspective on the phenomena of our mind, you could say, rather than seeing it through the lens of our neurosis, the phenomena of our mind is then seen more clearly for what they actually are. And that is actually the point then of the Buddha families, that the basic nature is pure. So that's where it's not about changing our mind, but changing our perspective. And that perspective, this wider perspective, is what we then call vipassana. Thank you for the great explanation of Yabgyum as non-dual bliss. Yeah, this is quite important, really. There's a lot to be said about that, but it's important to understand that it's not about just the act, you know. Thank you for your answer about faith. What Sonsei Rinpoche said about praying to teach us to have faith in them. When I was a child, I prayed to God to help me to have belief in him because I wanted to go beyond ordinary life and because of social surrounding. However, what faculties and skill needs one employed to develop the faith in teacher in Vajrayana work with doubt, even if teacher proved as a beneficial? Well, you know, this is the thing. Ultimately, the teacher is what abides within. It's on the condition of the external teacher that we then have something that we can, you could say, connect with. We can connect with enlightenment through the mirror of the teacher. Are there any relation between the 5 Buddha families and the practice of Maitri? Not per se in terms of, you could say, the definitions, but it's really more that some practices like the practice of Maitri opens our mind. So it's through any aspect of the path that we begin to understand Buddha nature, and through that also the 5 Buddha families. That was the best and most clear explanation of the jab jam, which I've heard in the past 10 years. Thank you. Jab jam, I guess you mean Yabgyum. Okay. Thank you. What is the difference between Chögyam Trungpa's mindfulness vs meditation and action? Mindfulness action in mindfulness in action is really meditation instruction. And by the way, this is instruction that very much comes from the Mahamudra and Dzogchen tradition, but at the same time, for anybody, it's such a brilliant work in terms of its applicability at all levels. But meditation in action is more actually, and this was, I think, one of the first, if not the first, work by Trungpa Rinpoche that was ever published by the sort of the new Shambhala publishing back in the 1970 or something. And that was about the 6 paramitas, basically. It's about the example of the Buddha, but then about the practice of the 6 paramitas. Gebcha Gumpa has an extensive website with interviews and photos of the nuns. Yes, yeah. Google that. Really wonderful. Thank you for class and explanations. Okay, we've gone a fair bit over time, but thank you very much for joining me here, and we'll do some dedication. Through this virtue, may all beings throughout existence awaken together without a single being left behind. In the pure realm of the luminous essence, the ground of the great perfection, may they remain inseparable from the kayas and wisdoms. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedoms to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefits of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you. There's a little comment that I should actually, before we log off, just should put in there. Yes, this is the Maitri program developed by Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, designed to specifically work with the Buddha families. That's right. Yes, Ed Podvall and his work with the Maitri program. That's right. Yes, the Maitri program incorporates the 5 Buddha families. You could say that as an expression of Maitri, of kindness and so on. Yes, then definitely this, and this was really, you could say, Trungpa Rinpoche working with the therapeutic community. That's right, yes. So that's where you could say there's a connection there, but you could say in terms of Maitri as such, it's, I don't want to say it's not the 5 Buddha families, but it's, there's not any immediate immediate connection. But I think what was the concept of the Maitri program was this extending ourselves to others and helping others, and that sort of spirit of wishing to benefit others. That's the reason behind the name of the Maitri program. But then the method that they worked with was the 5 Buddha families. That's right. Yes. Okay. I hope that clarifies. But anyway, thank you for reminding us of that. Extraordinary. Yeah. Okay.